Welcome to the Steel Flock, an AFC North podcast. We're your co-hosts, Matt and Ryan. And in today's episode, we're talking drafts. We are a couple weeks removed from the 2026 NFL draft, which, has given us time to move past any knee-jerk reactions and reflect a little deeper on our division's picks. The main questions we want to cover today are, did our four teams address their needs, and did they pick at value? Matt, take it away.
All right. So we wanted to take a little bit of an objective look for us to give us a foundation for what we're going to discuss. So I think there's kind of two sort of axes that we can look at. We have the team needs, of course, like did they address the needs? And did they get value in doing so? So how do we measure that? Rich Hill from Pat's Pulpit a few years ago took the Jimmy Johnson draft value chart that we all know and kind of modernized it, looking at many draft day trades over the years and kind of how those trades show how picks are valued by the league. It's slightly different from the Jimmy Johnson chart. It's more updated. It's more realistic on how teams have actually used it since like the decades ago, chart was first published. And it's a little more intuitive because it starts with the number one overall pick worth 1,000 points rather than like 3,000, which is kind of just so arbitrary, right? So we're using that to sort of look at the 257 spots in the draft to value how much those earlier picks are worth versus the later ones. And then bringing the value part in, we're going to look at the consensus big board from Arif Hassan of Wide Left. So that looks at, I think, 130 something big boards from draft analysts across the industry. So sort of an outsider, but, look at the collective like wisdom of the crowds and how these players are ranked. So again, we don't take these to be the be all and end all, but they're a good discussion point to kind of give us a jump off point for, okay, where did people see these players, and how did the teams navigate, through the draft? Because, we can just kind of knee jerk tell you if a player we thought was valued too high or too low, but this kind of at least gives us a foundation for that. We're going to see based on how that player was ranked on the big board versus where they were actually picked at that draft slot in the actual NFL draft. Were they a value? Were they a reach? And then based on how early and that gap in between the big board, how many Rich Hill points was the difference? But since that's just sort of an arbitrary, what does 11 Rich Hill points mean, or 300 JJ points mean? None of us know that off the top of our head. So what I wanted to do is sort of give us a look at what draft pick that would come out to, that sort of gap. So before we start, we just kind of wanted to look at how much draft capital did these teams spend in the draft, and how many picks they had. So they each averaged about 10. Bengals, fewer for obvious reasons. So we're going to take this starting point and then look through how those draft capital Rich Hill points were actually used. And at the end, we're kind of circle back and see, okay, did they get value versus the board or not? So jumping right into the Ravens. Yeah, just to kind of use this chart to explain. As we know, Venga, you want to take him with the 14th overall pick, but he's 13th on the consensus big board. That's CBB. So he was taken at a one pick value, but, one pick in the first round is obviously worth a lot more than it would be in the 7th round. So rather than just say, okay, he was a one pick value versus the big board, that one spot in the first from 14 to 13 is worth 11 Rich Hill points. And we kind of worked backwards from the Rich Hill chart and see, okay, well, what pick is worth 11 points? And that comes out to on the Rich Hill chart about the 154th overall pick. So essentially, the Ravens sort of got, a mid-day 3 picks worth of value versus the big board from, where they got him. Or in other words, they would be, it would be worth it to trade up, to get maybe that value, right? To even just to move up one pick to 13 to get that player, if that was what you wanted to do. And also gave like a need rating based on the position. So this was taken from NFL.com has the top 5 needs ranked. And then I sort of kind of went through, my sense of the roster and sort of ranked the other positions of needs. So if it's a really high need, then that's a 10. And if it's like a low need, like, QB or something like that, that would have just been a 1. Yeah. Does that make sense, Ryan? Is there anything we should maybe highlight more before we jump off?
No, I think that was a very good explanation. So, in the previous side, if you don't mind going back, it over here you can really see how much like first round picks make a difference. So the Browns had two first round picks, and you can see that their draft capital number is significantly higher than Ravens and Steelers, who both had one first round pick. And then, of course, the Bengals had no first round picks. And so you can, this chart here 100% demonstrates how valuable those first round picks are compared to as you go through each round of the draft. And so now going back to the Ravens slide, um, Matt did really well. He did really well in explaining kind of how we're coming to these numbers. And I know I needed to kind of go over a few examples with you as well, just to make sure that we're on the same page here. What I like about the exercise we're doing today is placing that value on not only a player but a pick. As a casual fan, it's very easy to just see like, oh, okay, Vega, Ioane at 14. I mean, that's great, right? But what does that really mean in terms of whether they should have traded up, whether they could have traded back, and just seeing picking him at 14, was that the best value, for selecting at that pick? And these numbers help to quantify that versus like, that was a good pick or a bad pick. And so now we can make an a more informed analysis of how our teams drafted it this year in 2026.
And yeah, again, this is just the foundation, right? We're not just totally beholden to this chart, as obviously none of the teams are. And we want to kind of take a more meta look at this too, right? So we can see, this is like the first few picks here. I think they kind of tell the story of this draft, right? You can see the need rating. These are the top two on just kind of just the general knowledge, right? NFL.com. Those are the top two needs on NFL.com for the Ravens, and they hit those with their first two picks. So number one need, offensive line. Number two, edge, pass rusher. So the picks, they make sense, right? They're not. You can't really in a vacuum criticize any of those picks because they hit value, they hit need, right? But the question is what we're not seeing on this chart, right? Now imagine we take out Venga Ioane and we insert Ruben Bay Jr. there. The Rich Hill points value would be much higher because his consensus big board rank was 7th. So if we took that player, we would be even much more in the green in terms of the value. So yeah, so I think it's sort of just a very by the numbers kind of draft. The Ioane pick, I mean, we did in our pre-draft episode, I kind of said the odds of one of Ruben Bain Jr. or Jordan Tyson being available at 14, most people were saying neither of them would be available, right? Based on where they're projected to go at that point right before the draft. But as it turns out, one of them was available. Ruben Bain was there. So I don't know. What did you think that they were going to take Bain, Ryan, when you were watching, or what were your thoughts on the Ravens when that pick came up?
I was expecting Vega over
Mhm.
Bain. For me, I have a deep love for the trenches.
Mm.
At the end of the day, Lamar Jackson is their franchise quarterback, and they need to protect him. Last year was rough dealing with injuries, etc. And so was I surprised that they selected Vega over Bain? Not at all. I mean, both, as you can see here, were positions of need, right? So seeing this, it made sense. And I mean, I would have loved if Vega made it down to Pittsburgh, but that was definitely not going to happen. I fully expected the Ravens to grab Ioane, and it's crazy that Bain did drop, as we talked about in the last episode, only for him to get picked 15th by Tampa Bay. So
Yeah.
he's really just going to be able to move right down the road. But I was not surprised with the Vegas selection. And like you said, this draft was it was very uncertain. I mean, up until the draft, everyone was like, basically after pick one, who knows what's going to happen, right? Is it Arville Reese? Is it David Bailey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And so I feel like in this draft more than others, you really kind of had to go by the numbers, and trying to figure out who would be a good pick based off of the team needs and then the value associated to those picks. With what I see, at least with your first and second round picks for the Ravens, it makes sense. And then clearly you attacked your top two needs, and just based off of the value, they were good selections for sure.
Yeah, and you see they went right down the needs list 1, 2, 3, right? 10, 9, 8, offensive line, pass rusher, wide receiver. So it's logical. But so yeah, I think from where we were on day one of the draft, Wenger was the right pick. I think my beef is just big picture. I just wish we weren't in that position to need that, to where we have, you know, our best starter on the interior offensive line is John Simpson, who, hasn't had a positively graded season, in a lot of people's eyes in a long time. I would have, if it were me, I would have gone into this draft with at least a serviceable starter at all three guard spots, or I guess at least two at the very minimum. But instead, we were just kind of, you know, painted into a corner with this pick. It would have been great to have, if we had Sayamalu, signed him away for under 11 million. If we had maybe like a handshake deal with Kevin Zeitler to come back, for maybe 6 to 9 million at the other guard spot, after he won't affect the compensatory pick formula, we would have been free to go any direction we wanted with this pick, go total BPA, and also just had a very, very high floor for this season on what's going to happen for Lamar. But instead, we just weren't in a position to take, in my opinion, the best player, and in the consensus big board's opinion, the best player available. Again, Ruben Bain was 7th on the big board, and I think most people would have agreed he'd be ranked higher. I just think it's going to be a lot of pressure on Ioane to be like elite from day one. If he's just like pretty good, what's the on-field difference between like a pretty good guard and like a really good guard? And is he going to be able to hit that in year 1 or even 2? I don't think it's as much of a slam dunk as everyone says. He's probably going to be solid, but we're just seeing like at pass rusher, like, at 29 years old, Danielle Hunter is getting 40 million a year and Will Anderson getting $50 million. The gap on field between a good, really good pass rusher and like a solid one is huge. And that's why the salaries reflect that. So I think big picture, I don't love that this was just kind of defaulted. It sounds to me like they had penciled Ioane in there before the draft as their first round pick, and Bain was there and they were considered him, and then they just were like, let's just go with what we were going to do anyway and take Ioane.
You make a really good point. If the Ravens had approached their offseason in somewhat of a similar way as Cleveland, like their whole focus of the offseason was bringing in O-line, right? So that way they could focus their draft. I mean, granted, like their first pick was, and we'll go over this later, Spencer Fano, which was, you know, and then their second pick was it Concepcion?
Uh,
That's right. And again, positions of need, but as not to kind of go off topic too much, but after the Bucks drafted Ruben Bain, I'm not sure if you saw his walk up where he's just like totally all business. Didn't even stop to like flash a picture, in the mirror. I was like, man, like I was getting such Raven vibes from that walk up that if he did go to the Ravens, I'd be like, oh shoot, man, like this guy's gonna be a monster for them. And I'd be, who knows how it'll play out. But truthfully though, like both Vega and Bain feel like Ravens players. Like
Sure. Yeah.
they both feel like they give that vibe, and so we'll see how it plays out. I think,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, yeah. I was kind of like he's being talked about Venga as like a tone setter for the Ravens. And I thought it's just, have you seen Ruben Bain Jr. play? I think he's a little bit of a tone setter also, but I guess we need that on the offensive line, maybe more than we do on defense where we've already got some fire. But yeah, I think, yeah, he definitely has that like, you know, quiet, quiet demeanor, but like, you know, on field rage that the Ravens have been kind of missing, I think. Um, but
yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
I guess, yeah,
you totally get. I mean, I don't want to go as far as to say like Ray Lewis vibes for Ruben Bain, but like just yeah, his whole aura walking onto that stage was just like, dude, like this guy means business, and he's not
yeah.
effing around. Like he's gonna take this super seriously, and those NFC South teams gonna have to watch out for him for sure. And I'd
Yeah,
rather it be them than than Pittsburgh for sure.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
So kind of with that
yeah.
being said, do you still like who's your favorite player that the Ravens drafted? Would it be Vega because it was just that huge position of need at a really good value? Or is there another player that the Ravens drafted that you feel super, super pumped up about? Because it seems like you're satisfied, you're settled, but you're not pumped, for Vega. So is there another player that, in your gut, you're like, oh man, that was a good one, and now I'm super stoked to watch them play.
I mean, I guess this is kind of cope, but I do think that Zion Young, I mean, and this is chalk too. I'm not obviously the only person talking about him. He was a second round pick, but I mean, if you compare Zion Young to Bain, I do think it was pointed out that if they did take Bain, they would have like the shortest armed like edge pairing in the whole maybe league history in minor league history if they had Bain and like, you know, Mike Green with like 32.5 inch arms. I think that having one of those guys is probably fine, but maybe two of them might be an issue. Whereas Zion Young, he's got, I mean, not super much longer, but 33 some inch arms. And I think he to me is like the cope after the Max Crosby trade kind of fell through, where we're getting like the run defense that we would have gotten from Max that Dre Hendrickson obviously doesn't have, and kind of like the attitude that I was hoping that Crosby would kind of bring to the defense. Because yeah, I don't know if you've seen any of the kind of like viral clips of him kind of going nuts, like in the pregame coin toss and that kind of stuff, but he is a guy who just seems like not like very serious about the game and like a little bit not right in the head in like a good way. So I think he solves kind of two things that were kind of missing maybe from the Raiders defense that we, got a lot cheaper than we would have getting Max Crosby in that 2 first round pick trade. So I think that's maybe the first part to highlight.
How do you feel about Lane and Surratt? Your those were your two wide receiver picks in the third and fourth rounds, and the third most important need for the Ravens. Are you happy that they selected those two? I kind of like Surratt for the Steelers, and it just obviously didn't happen, which is fine. And as you can see here, you guys actually got him at a really good value. But do you feel like Lane and Surratt kind of fill the needs for what you're looking for in receivers for Lamar?
They do slot in really perfectly, I think, in terms of their needs, like kind of just a more of a big bodied X with lane with speed. And then with Surratt, everyone is, projecting him as like a big slot receiver in the NFL. So one thing that's come up, so there's two important stats that people confuse, I think. So there's what I would say is like CTR, like contested target rate, and contested like CTC, like contested catch, percentage or completion, whatever. Yeah. The first one, contested target rate, that's how often your targets were contested by the other team. That's the one that people, I think, miss. The contested catch rate, everyone understands that intuitively. It's like, okay, there's a contested catch. Was it a 50-50 ball, or does this guy win like 60% of the time if he's like a real like ball winner at the catch point, right? But in this draft class, we got the two wide receivers with the worst contested target rate. So basically, they they get their catches. There's a defender in their face more than any other wide receiver in this class. We picked the bottom two. So we're like, we got we've got enough of these guys that can separate. We've got Zay Flowers, we've got Bateman, and all of their, if you look at the separation metrics and stuff, they're always ranked super high. And obviously, Rashad Bateman, and especially Zay, are a little bit smaller. So now we're going to get two guys that just did not separate at all in college, but can win at the catch point, hopefully. So I guess the idea is like in the red zone, it's hard to separate anyway. So just get a guy who can win at the catch point. But I do think that that's a little bit. There's a little bit of overconfidence maybe in that these guys can turn it around a little bit. For Surratt, I think maybe he can because his role might be so different. Like he never played inside much at all at slot in college, and it seems to me like he will in the NFL. And just by the nature of that role, you just kind of get easy separation because you're in the slot. You can get cleaner releases and stuff like that. But Lane, I think the learning curve is pretty steep. I've heard people say that his like analytics profile is really poor. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of different ways we can kind of pick apart his profile, and he's a very young player, and I think there are a lot of promising aspects to his profile. But taking those two guys that can't separate and projecting them to separate in the NFL, I think is a little risky. So is what I would say.
Maybe there'll be, just kind of like you said, the red zone and chain movers, just kind of bot someone out to get that first down. I don't know.
Right.
We'll see. We'll see. And yeah, I saw that the Ravens did draft two tight ends. They're trying to refill that tight end core that kind of you guys lost a bunch of people. I didn't really do much research on either Hipner or Cuevas, but do they again feel are they solid enough replacements ish for Kolar and likely leaving? Do they kind of fit those same play styles?
Yeah, so it's actually pronounced Matthew Himner, Ryan. I want to make sure you get that.
I am
I
so
want to make sure you
sorry.
get that right.
I'm so sorry, Matthew. I'm so sorry, Matthew and Matt.
Yeah, so Matthew Himner, I think he's a really interesting player. I think the Ravens traded up to get him, which me and everyone else thought they were trading up to get a center, and of course they totally don't address center at all, and then get he's like a seam stretcher guy. He's got some size. Like I think there's kind of a pretty narrow band of weight of a lot of these prospects. It's like 240-ish to 255, right? And that might not seem like a very meaningful difference, but I think at the higher end it is. So he's 253. That's right around like where Kittle was. And I think like that coming out. And I think it's meaningful that he is not like 240. So I think he can do a little bit more as a blocker maybe than some of the smaller guys and the pros. And he's just a seam threat with athleticism. And I think he can have a pretty defined role to where I think Doyle can really, use him as a chess piece to keep his defenses honest if they know that he can threaten the seam like pretty quickly. So I do think he's a little bit of a wild card. I hated the pick at the time, even though he was on my radar. Like Daft on Draft, James Foster, a really good draft analyst. I had kind of read a little bit of his takes on him, and he was the guy who I knew was really touting him before the draft happened. So he's probably the biggest wild card, I think, because it's possible that he could have a role immediately, but it's also possible that he was at 22% in line in college. Maybe that's just he just doesn't become much of a true tight end in year one. And he came out of SMU. He was, I think, 4 full years, I think, at Michigan and did nothing. Whereas RJ Maryland was also at SMU the whole time at tight end And he was all conference as a true sophomore with over 500 yards. And Hibner, I don't think ever crossed 500 yards in a season in college. I think so again, he might not have been the best tight end prospect on his own team because RJ Maryland is also really fast, but Maryland wasn't drafted at all, and Hibner, the Ravens showed up for him. So clearly, like, I think there is something there. But yeah, he's another guy to sort of look at the values that we have here. He was taken at 133, but on the consensus big board, he was ranked at 241. So that gap between 133 and 241, that's 16 Rich Hill points that we sort of reached on. And that comes out, those 16 points, to like the 137th overall pick. So we kind of gave up, a mid day 3 picks worth of value in terms of that reach to get him. Or inversely, maybe we could have traded back a little bit and gotten some of that value back, taken him more towards where he's ranked on the big board. But I think it's probably pretty clear that with the tight end run that was happening, that the actual sort of tight end market, if you want to call it that, of between the 32 teams was valuing these tight ends so much higher that everyone had to go ahead of where they were on that big board. So that's sort of like the strategy factor that I think it can be easy to miss from the outside. But I think, yeah, we just have to look, sort of soberly at what at where his talent level might be, given how low he was on the consensus big board.
I'm going to ask because I have to, and I just want to make fun of you. So, sixth round, pick number 211, Ryan Eckley, punter. I mean, he must be the most incredible punter. So I feel like if a punter gets drafted, they must have a magical leg.
It's the second time that we've taken I think the first punter off the board who was clearly the second punter based on consensus. So they must have some really good advanced metrics on him to say why he's better. Yeah, I mean, me, like, I'm so deep in this. There's like a dozen guys I wanted at that 6th pick after waiting from 174 to 211 and dreaming of who it might be. And then Ryan Eckley was announced, and yeah, but yeah.
I haven't kept up with the Ravens roster. Do they not have a punter signed?
We don't really. So at least last time we spent a 4th round pick on taking the first punter off the board, who was the clear actually second on the consensus big board. So it's at least a bit of a improvement. But, is it better than paying a punter? I think maybe $4 million or whatever our punter got in free agency. Maybe so, right? If we
It'll be
trust
cheaper. It'll be
yeah,
cheaper.
I think we trust our coaching staff to develop him. So yeah, but that was tough. I think, how confident are we that this second punter is the best punter and worth using a pick on him? I don't know. I'm sure they've got some metrics on him that they like, but even if you have those metrics, I don't know how confident you can really be in that in that pick. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just the last question that I had before we move on to the Bengals. So, 5th round, pick 174, Adam Randall. Do you think that Baltimore is going to start doing a little bit more running back by committee? Because, King Henry is just getting up there in age, a lot of tread on the tires.
Okay, so yeah, I mean he's a size speed guy, so he's not fast maybe in a vacuum, but he's definitely fast for like a 230-pound running back. But the reason why I'm not reading a lot into it necessarily, Ravens fans are deep in the weeds in this, but others may not be. This was actually our owner's pick. For the first time in his career, he was like, I want to make my own pick. So of course he took a skill guy, right? And he just like took a big size speed, running back, which is kind of a fun pick to make, right? You can just kind of dream of the upside. Converted wide receiver, he's he's got a lot of upside for sure. He's kind of like a David Johnson, right? But I think it's possible this guy doesn't even make the team because the coaching staff and GM had no say in it at all. So, but you bring up a really good point though, that again, we did our scheme statistical comparison, coordinator exercise a couple episodes ago. And, it's unclear right now. We don't really know how much, Doyle is like Ben Johnson's, disciple or Peyton at this point, Sean Payton. So we all know no one rotates running backs like Sean Payton, right? So if that's, what he's absorbed as the best philosophy, it's I think Ravens fans are underrating a little bit that we could see way more of a committee than maybe we're expecting, given the talent level after Derrick Henry. I wouldn't be surprised if some Ravens fans are tearing their hair out in the first couple games, seeing Henry play a little less. But I don't necessarily think that this pick is the clearest indicator of that. So yeah.
Got it. Got it. And yeah, just gotta say, Mark Ingram, Mark Ingram, I hate you so much. Oh man, that was brutal. I mean, it was hilarious. I couldn't help but laugh, but still,
Yeah, he went to
uh,
the Lions den in Pittsburgh and called the shot. So yeah, I like it.
man, it was so funny though. Like I
Yeah.
was watching it on repeat. I mean, that's just, and then the other Ravens fan too. That was like Pittsburgh. I'll keep it short, just like your postseason. I was like,
Yeah.
oh.
No, with these new coaching staffs, I think people are underestimating how much the rivalry is going to be back this year in a big way, I think. So,
And
yeah.
that's really exciting. That's
Yeah,
super, super exciting.
for sure. Yeah. We're ready. We're ready. I'm excited.
It's, it's going down. It's going down. And we're going to figure out, Pittsburgh's going to figure out its offensive line. I mean, we'll go over that in, the Steelers slide, but yeah, this is going to be an exciting year for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Again, one thing I wanted to do was create a bubble chart to kind of visualize all these numbers kind of that we're talking about. And I'm pretty glad that I did, because I think it ended up being a little bit, I mean, it literally helped me sort of like contextualize and like think about like the draft class. It literally put it in perspective for me. So I've kind of broken it up into 4 quadrants here. So again, I assigned like a need rating. Like the top 5 needs are 10 through 6. And I went through each roster and kind of assigned the other positions that weren't on the NFL.com ranked needs at the bottom. So that's a little bit subjective, but I think most people would probably agree with what I did here. So the size of the bubble is how many Rich Hill points. In other words, how much draft capital they got. So the bigger, earlier picks are going to be, the bigger bubble. And then the horizontal axis is going to be the need. So, 1 all the way on the left, 10, the biggest need on the right. And then, so the value versus the consensus board as measured in sort of relative Rich Hill points from where their spot on the consensus board to where they were ranked, the actual pick they used. That's the vertical axis. So, vertical axis is a little bit different in terms of the total range on some of these, but for the Ravens, it's plus minus 50. So, for the Ravens, you can just kind of see that, for 3 of their first 4 picks, they're squarely in that top right quadrant of, okay, it is a need, and they got a little bit of value on the consensus board when they made those picks. So as much as I'm frustrated because, yeah, if they had picked Ruben Bain, he would have been way higher, like way top right on this, But Ioane's still a need, and that's where they invested, again, their most capital. So it's hard for me to really get too worked up here. And, again, the picks that I was like, didn't really like the value here. Again, you can see that the draft capital is pretty low on them, other than Jacoby Lane, who, again, is a big position of need, and I think was higher on the NFL teams boards versus analysts. Cuevas and Hibner, the tight ends, both reaches, but at positions of need. And coming after a million tight ends had come off the board in the real draft that actually happened. So it's tough for me to really be too angry about the draft, I think, just given, how we can kind of see that things lined up based on the chart. But yeah, Rivers is you can see, I think corner is still kind of a need, right? And they saw him dropping and they clearly like that value there. But yeah, any any thoughts here, Ryan?
Well, at least you can happily say that none of the
Right.
players the Ravens selected were a reach and also not a need, right? I think any players in that quadrant is already kind of like I don't want to give it a full on failing grade, but that would be such a waste of a pick, right? If you selected a player that you not only didn't need, but, would have been a reach if you had drafted them. So I think from just super, super high level view, kind of regardless of personal feelings on the picks themselves, I mean, you can see here clearly that the Ravens, they picked for need, just basically everyone except for Rivers is on the right hand side of the axis, right? I mean, just the Ravens knew what they needed and they went for it. And yeah, I mean, they may have reached on a number of them, but at least they could honestly say that, hey, I mean, we needed them, right? So we're gonna try and take a big swing and see if anything connects, and if it does, then bam, like we made some solid picks. But at least high level view, just looking in, okay, one could say very easily that yeah, the Ravens had a successful draft. It was productive, it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
successful.
By the numbers, yeah. The Ravens are like that. People always talk about the BPA team, but not too many in that top left sort of, okay, not a need, but BPA, so we just chase the value. So yeah, just kind of a straightforward.
The Bengals didn't have a first round pick this year. We talked about it the last time that they traded for Dexter Lawrence and gave the New York Giants the 10th overall pick. But you can see here, based off of the chart, that the at least with their first three picks, the Bengals did fill needs on the defense as well as the offensive line, which is their two arguably weakest areas of the team is again their defense as a whole, not just specific
Mm.
positions, but just as a whole, and then offensive line to
Yeah, that's
to
right.
keep Joe Burrow
That's what really,
upright.
sorry to interrupt you, but that's what really ticked me off. Like you just see the Ravens just with no floor at the center position. And then there, the our GM said, okay, well, we liked two centers, and it's like, okay, maybe if you had a veteran or something, but if you have no centers, you might have to think about a guy who's not the perfect fit, but can give you something. And there was so much value on the board that the Bengals took two centers at huge value. Like like Brian Parker was just such a good value that they just had to grab a second one. Like I just there were this was just really damning to me from the Ravens approach to show that there were opportunities at multiple points in the draft to not just reach on a center but take some value on a center. So sorry, yeah, I didn't interrupt you.
No, no, absolutely, and you know, both Liu and Parker, they have some good starting experience in college, and they could actually become starters in the NFL. One of them could move to guard or whatnot, but yeah, that's not something that I considered when looking at this. Is from a Ravens perspective, we've definitely talked at length about the Ravens' strategy for getting offensive linemen to fill all of those holes on the line. And I what you had said earlier about how it was a little disappointing for you that while the Ioane pick is, it's a good pick. He's fine. But if the Ravens had a more O-line based approach in when free agency started, that it kind of unfortunately put them in the position where it's like, okay, I mean, we just have to goal line. It doesn't matter who's there. I mean, we just have to goal line because we didn't prepare enough ahead of time so that the door could have been wide open for a number of different players, right? At the 14th picks. But at least, for the Bengals second round pick, got real good value for Cassius Howell, edge player. And, truthfully, I didn't look into a lot of the Bengals players as much, but it's there's a lot of green here in terms of making value picks, right? Outside of their third round pick and their second, fourth round pick, they looked at their board, they saw who was available, and based off of just the value that they determined for the players that
Yeah.
they were able to
I
pick at
think, yeah.
value
I
for
mean,
the
coming
most
in,
part,
they're
right?
obviously, as you saw in the earlier slide, like they're coming in with by far the least draft capital. So I think this is where that kind of Rich Hill value pick equivalent kind of can really show their strategy, right? Like they're taking guys at such values versus the board that they're kind of almost like adding adding picks or capital, almost as if they traded back and got some more capital. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's like
but yeah,
some real bargain deals, yeah.
and if you like the Bengals and you have no, yeah, if you have, this is, I mean, this is almost though, obviously it's a strategy if you don't have a lot of draft capital, but it's also a strategy if you have no scouting department and you're just like, all right, well, consensus board looks pretty good on
Yeah.
this guy. Like, let's just pick that guy. If you're not going to invest much in scouting like they do.
But Howell could be an impact player right away. He's opposite to Boye Mafe, and I mean we talked about him in a previous episode, but I mean guys coming off the edge on both sides, it's better than what they had last year, right? So, I think just overall that defensive front, at least along the line, has certainly improved with the draft and with free agency. So, not to say that they're automatically gonna win the division because they improved their defensive line, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's definitely it got better,
Yeah.
right? It got better. I can at least say that.
Yeah. And Cassius Howell to me is a really just a fascinating, like Rorschach's prospect, right? Especially when you consider how the Ravens drafted, passing on Bain and then taking Zion Young. Because from one perspective, Cassius Howell is kind of like a discount, like arbitrage Ruben Bain, like an incredibly short armed player. But with huge production, like unbelievable production at a high level of competition. But he is just like, I think he's almost 20 pounds smaller than Bain, which gives me so much less confidence that he could be on the field on rundowns. So on the one hand, he's a discount Ruben Bain. On the other hand, where they were picking him pretty high in the second, they clearly passed on Zion Young, who the Ravens took. Who's got the prototypical frame that you'd want for a 3-down type of edge player versus Howe, who just, I mean, he briefly had, I think, the shortest arms at the position ever at the combine. It just looks like he's just going to get pushed around a lot especially on rundowns, but maybe even washed out on pass downs too. Yeah, I think overall they did a pretty good job. I think they thought the corners were going to go early, probably reached on Takara Davis. It is what it is. I'm not gonna, in the context of the other picks, I think they did pretty good.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then, Kobe Young was also quite of a bit of a reach too, but overall, I can't complain about this draft.
No, yeah, yeah. And again, so this is, it's a little similar to the Ravens, right? Where they have quite a bit of their draft capital clearly concentrated in that top right quadrant, right? But yeah, Colby Young is just, again, this is subjective. They weren't in the top 5 in terms of positions, WR. But I put receiver at a 1, to be honest, for them, right? Maybe Bengals fans disagree, but they have, probably like a third of their cap invested at wide receiver already. So to me, like, it's not a need. And to reach that high on a player like wide receiver, where, you know, there were so many options in this draft, is strange to me, but clearly they just loved him. And maybe he's just going to be one of those special teams guys. But yeah, I think you can see objectively from a 10,000-foot view, it was a pretty good draft. And their only reach was Takar Davis, who, you know, maybe they're gearing up for, Declan Doyle and some other big passing attacks in the division. Moving on to the Steelers here. Take us away, Ryan. Talk them up.
In my introduction, I commented on having some time to move past the knee jerk reactions, right? And uh, Max was that kind of knee jerk reaction. I mean, everyone has seen at this point the whole drama with Makai Lemon and getting sniped and all that kind of stuff. And I was genuinely excited to potentially get him. I think he's a great talent. And value wise, not that I looked at it, but it probably would have been really good value to get Makai Lemon all the way down at 21. But, you know, when you take a step back, take a couple breaths, you get over your BS about the whole Makai Lemon thing. You can see from this chart that the Steelers did a lot of reaching, actually. And you look at picking Max at 21 when he had the consensus big board ranking of 33. I mean, uh, pick number 64. That's a big one to essentially kind of forfeit to get Max here, and again, going back to the knee jerk reaction, I was just like, he's a developmental player, and like, is that really what you want to take, in the first round? And then you go down the rabbit hole of, man, I mean, based off of the value, I don't know what the numbers are, but based off of the value, you could have even traded up for someone like Makai Lemon. And then in the second round, gotten more value at offensive line. I mean, consensus big board, Max would have been there the first pick of the second round, right? Hypothetically. So that was kind of, a trip at first, but I did take some time after to watch some highlights of Max, and I mean, the dude's legit. I mean, he has all the tools to be an elite tackle, the athleticism, and I mean, although he started football late, I mean, he had a lot of starts at Arizona State, and I think over his entire career at Arizona State, I mean, he didn't like give up any sacks, or it was like only one or two. I mean, and that's for someone who just started football, that's pretty good. That's very impressive. And I think that, Pittsburgh did decline the 5th-year option for Broderick Jones. And so I think that's kind of an indication of where they're planning to go. I think the Broderick Jones experiment just didn't pan out as expected. And so what you have now is you have Troy Fautano, who's already a proven offensive tackle in the NFL. And then you bring in Max, who has all the right measurables to be an elite offensive tackle as well. So what you kind of have here now is you're set at the tackle positions, right? Regardless of who plays on what side, whether it's Max on left, Troy stays on right, or vice versa, right? Because Max played right in college and Troy played left in college as well. But regardless, the Pittsburgh Steelers now have two foundational pieces at the tackle spots, right? And I mean, Aaron Rodgers still hasn't signed yet, at least as of this recording. He's visiting Pittsburgh, but as of this recording, nothing signed yet. But you're going to have a 43-year-old QB in the AFC North division, and I mean, similar to both Lamar and Burrow, they need to be upright to to at least in the case of Lamar and Burrow, just like really just be the elite quarterbacks of the entire league, not just the division, but the league. But then you have a 43-year-old Aaron Rodgers who, I mean, if he's not upright, then he's practically useless because he doesn't have any escapability like he used to. And if for whatever reason he chooses not to be with the Pittsburgh Steelers in this coming season, he'll still need protection for either Will Howard or Drew Aller, whoever, starts. And so, having these foundational tackles, I think, long term might have
Yeah.
been the best decision, at the time. Because it was still a need, it was very high at need. It was outside of QB,
No, no, no. Yeah. I mean,
offensive line was the biggest needs. I've just thought more about it, and I've become happier and happier the more I've thought about not just immediate impact, but long-term impact. So that's
yeah.
just
So
kind
I
of
would say
I
again,
know that you're high on Max,
initial
so
reaction, the Steelers are kind of paying a double tax, right? You lose out on Makai and Lemon in the first, so you reach on a Hanachor. And then you go around in the second, and then you reach on Jeremy Bernard because you didn't get the wide receiver that you wanted in the first. So that is ugly, of course. But yeah, Hanachor is a guy that I was, high on since the Senior Bowl. And, again, at that point, he was like, oh, he's like a, top 50 type of guy, but then it kind of, as he kept rising ahead of the draft, it kind of makes you think, okay, well, okay, forget the consensus board. Like, where should you take him? Like, what is he really worth? And I think he's worth this pick for sure, honestly, especially with those earlier guys looking like they're probably gonna have to play on the interior, maybe even permanently. Like the top like 2 or 3 O linemen take it, right? Whereas Hunter, he's a pure tackle. Like he's got basketball background, incredibly
yeah,
coordinated, like a great build, super athletic, like prototypical
yeah,
tackle. Yeah, and like you said with his production, like he's not
yeah.
polished, but he's so athletic and he has such sort of like grit that he's figuring it out already, ways to not get his quarterback touched. And that he's still got the upside to get the technique uh home. So
Yeah. And even at the Senior Bowl too, I mean, he was definitely blocking players like David Bailey and all those guys who went higher up in the draft and was successful at it. So while numerically it looks like a reach, I think both short-term and long-term impacts will be good, for Max. And then, Jeremy Bernard again, according to the Rich Hill, analysis, that was also a reach. But taking a breath, taking a step back, and looking at what he offers, it's well, one, it was another high position of need, wide receiver, that they filled right away in the second round. But his play style complements what Pittsburgh has started building over there. With DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr. Jeremy Bernard fits into that very well. And so I think in that 11 personnel, you have those three receivers, and then, Pittsburgh is really developing the offensive line. I mean, it could be potent, the offense. So while this, according to Rich Hill, was a reach, I was very happy actually with the Jeremy Bernard pick. And again, a lot of these look like reaches, but they all filled needs. I mean, I know at the very end of the draft, it's all like not as much position of need, but Jennings Dunker, he could slide in, into that left guard position right off the bat. And so if you have, let's just say Max goes on the left side, you have Jennings Dunker at left guard, and then the right side is already solid. I mean, that's it. I mean, you're good for a long time because they're all young, assuming hopefully none of them get injured. But I mean, you put yourself in a good position. And, Pittsburgh brought in James Campen this offseason to boost up the offensive line from a coaching perspective. So yeah, I was happy with that. Weekend, you know, Kenny Gainwell and Calvin Austin left in free agency, so that left a big hole for returning kicks. So he fits in right there. He could also come in the slot and just run those really short routes, and he's real shifty. So, good separation from there. I didn't really know too much
yeah.
about Gabriel Rubio. I mean, even on like NFL.com, he didn't even have a picture, in his profile thing. So, I other than he's just a big body to, be around stuff, right? I really don't know too much about him. I think there were some injury issues too, but Riley Nowakowski, I mean, we Connor Hayward left in free agency, but I was watching highlights, and I mean, this guy's legit too. I mean, he legit runs and hits like a fullback, but he can also catch, like a tight end. I mean, that's why he's a combo fullback or H back tight end position. And that's just one more weapon, for Aaron Rodgers to potentially dump it off to in 21 personnel, should they approach their game plan in that way. And then, Robert Spears Jennings, that's more for me, at least a depth piece. They already have Deshaun Elliott, Jaquan Brisker, and Jalen Ramsey at the safety position. But from what I read, Robert Spears Jennings is like super fast, super athletic. So, that never hurts as well. And I know I kind of skipped over Dalen Everett. A lot of people like didn't like that pick for the Steelers, but his size, physicality, and speed, because he also ran, I think, like under 4.4 in the combine as well for the 40-yard dash. But I think with the kind of defense that Patrick Graham runs and the type of players that he likes, Dalen Everett's, like I said, size, physicality, and speed, it fits that defensive philosophy. And then, of course, like the hometown, the hometown favorite choice of Eli Heidenreich. I mean, I know that need rating is a 3 since we have Jalen Warren and Rico Dowdle from at least Rico Dowdle from the offseason. There's a lot of comparison to Christian McCaffrey. I mean, he's not Christian McCaffrey, but when you watch highlights, I mean, he looks exactly like him, just in terms of like speed and catching ability and just kind of juking. I mean, he looked the part, and I think that long term, that could also be a really uh, a good investment that people won't realize until later on. I mean, Jalen Warren, he's not young. It's not like he's 23 years old. He's starting to get up into the higher 20s. And Rico Dotto, yeah, I mean, he's also not old, but I think that he
Oh yeah,
they'll be
yeah.
able to use Eli in different schemes, and I think it could be really exciting to throw him in there and watch him do some work. But yeah, so I know I skipped over Drew Aller too, but I can see why Pittsburgh wanted him. I remember thinking, like, I wonder how he compared to Big Ben. And I think the size wise, Big Ben was only like a few pounds heavier. And that was pretty much it. But does Aller have that escapability like how Big Ben could? To be seen. I haven't watched a ton of highlights on Drew Aller just yet, and especially since he didn't play last year too, right? But I think that if McCarthy is able to do his QB whisperer thing, Drew Aller does have the at least the physical
Yeah.
traits to
So
at
yeah,
least
I
handle
mean, I
the
really
AFC
like the Steelers
North.
draft. I was pretty high on it. I then ran the numbers and kind of saw that versus the consensus board. Yeah, most of the picks were. I knew they were slight reaches, but I didn't quite realize how far down on the consensus board they were. But yeah, this is one where like the Niners kind of talk like, oh, we reached on this guy, but he's perfect for our team or whatever. And I think that's mostly BS for the Niners, but I really see it for the Steelers draft, to be honest. Like, again, I do this like off-season full simulation thing with 31 other, guys. And in that draft, I took for the Ravens, Dunker and Heidenreich. I really like both those guys. And yeah, for Hanachor, you got to talk about him with Dunker, right? And when you think about that, you've got athleticism, versatility with Dunker. I think he's going to
Yep.
be a great guard and such a huge value. Like, I wouldn't have loved if the Ravens. So if the Ravens had taken Bain, I wouldn't have loved Dunker at our second round pick, but I would have been fine with it. I do think he would have been worth that pick, to be honest. So to get him in, with your third round pick, that's that's really good. That's such good value. And obviously the big board value reflects
Yep.
that. Um and
Yeah.
Weegen, there are more returns now with the new rules. So and he is arguably the best resume returner that we've seen in quite some time. So, if you're going to reach on a special teams guy on day 3, I don't know what he can do from scrimmage, but I can see it there. But what I really like is I think you guys took two receivers that are I could kind of comp a little bit to Robert Woods, um, who I think people kind of forget that before Puka, there was Robert Woods. Again, Puka is like a cheat code because he's like literally the best blocking receiver in the league, certainly according to PFF grades, and he's in that highest. I won't say he's the best receiver, but I think he is in that elite tier, unquestionably to me. And so that's what you could. But before that, Robert Woods was like one of the top blocking receivers um, in the NFL in the early days with the Rams, and he had like I think almost like 500 rushing yards with the Rams or something like that in his in 3 seasons there. So like it's weird to me that the narrative on Bernard, the obviously is like he is like this boring guy who's like a kind of just a vanilla 2 or 3, whereas like he has that elite like 6.85 I think 3 cone time, and he's got some juice coming out of the backfield. So I think he could be used in a pretty diverse set of ways. And obviously, all that goes up to times 10 with Heidenreich, where I think he gives like so much versatility to go from 11 to 21 personnel instantly, where you can just motion him into the backfield. And, all of a sudden you can go from, you know, running backs to getting a handoff there, or, one running back to two, or even 2 to 3. Like if you could literally have Nowakowski in the backfield with a traditional running back, and then motion Heidenreich in there to do like a diamond and run that triple option too, out of what looks like kind of a more balanced set. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, Nowakowski. So again, these guys are like Nowakowski is not as duplicative as you put it exactly right, that he's not okay, we have too many tight ends and we added a new one. Like, no, he's like a better version of a fullback that's more versatile in your offense.
And he's like he's big enough to block like a real fullback, but he can also catch, like a tight end. And so I mean he's just again, like Heidenreich, just versatile.
Yeah. And like pre-draft, like Heidenreich to me, like my dream, like the way that I think he fits is like he just cranks up the physicality of your offense like immediately. Like in those like triple option service academy offenses, like physicality is like the key. Like you're not getting on the field if you're not going to block your ass off. And, he's willing to do that, I think. And, you know, could he be like a Heinz Ward, as the stealing case? And just like, he's not that much smaller than Heinz Ward was, could he be just knocking people off their cleats, as a blocking wide
Yeah.
receiver? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's possible. And he's got the juice, obviously, from an athleticism standpoint to do it. So, two of the sort of three of the shiftiest guys in the whole draft at wide receiver with Bernard, Legion, and Heidenreich is an interesting way to complement, like you said, those two towering outside guys you have. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, Jeremy Bernard can play both in the slot and on the outside. So, if Angelico or McCarthy wants to kind of switch it up and put Pittman in the slot, which, he did in Indianapolis. I mean, those three wide receivers complement each other. All of them can move the chains. And yeah, I mean, you throw in those other players like Nowakowski, Heidenreich, and I mean, even Weechen, he could be, like a jet sweep thing or just a real quick slant, quick curl, just a quick out if it's like 4th and 1, and he has the quickness and shiftiness to do that. So yeah, I mean, just overall, I feel very excited on how the draft played out. I don't know if I could pinpoint one player that just stands out from the rest that I'm just like, oh yeah, like X factor game changer. But
hmm.
I really like drafting Max and Dunker to just. I have a deep love for the trenches. I mean, I offensive line in high school. So they've filled out the line. It's been such a crapshoot for like years now. And so, yeah, you bring in these two players to fill in the left side. The right side is good. I mean, you know, assuming that Max and Dunker play to their
Yeah, and you're
potential
over investing, right? It's a clear contrast to
line.
the Ravens, where we've got a third round pick on the interior last year. But other than that, we've got like a shaky older vet at one guard position, no center, and yeah, we've got a first round pick at guard, but then we don't come back at O line until the fourth pick from Mr. Irrelevant in the seventh round. So to take to just keep fueling, competition at those spots upside for the future. It's what I wish the Ravens were doing, on the trenches.
What I think this draft also really shows is
Mm.
the culture change because only 3 of the picks were on defense and the rest were all offense. And in a Mike Tomlin draft, it would have been the opposite, right? Only a few players on offense and the rest on defense. So I think you can clearly see the shift in culture from defensive Mike to offensive Mike. So, we'll see how we'll just have to see how it goes and how they can utilize all of these new tools. And I guess we'll have to see what happens at the quarterback position as well.
Yeah. And so, yeah, real quick with the bubble chart here, you can see that, not a lot of value, right? But just really like we're going to hit our needs and we have our own board and we're not going to worry too much about the consensus big board. Seems like I had to move the scale from minus 50 to
Yeah.
minus 100 so I could fit a Hanshore in there. But, you know, again, you can see the pairing here, right? At that same position, right? On value at one or reach at another, you're kind of making
Yeah.
it up later on there.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, but yeah, moving on to the Browns. I
Yeah.
mean, they're coming in here with a lot of draft capital. I was a bit shocked at just how many of the picks kind of were reaches. It felt like they weren't really as it happened, but I guess versus the consensus big board, there were some reaches there, right? But yeah, I mean they're really hitting needs and they're getting some value, it seems like, for the most part.
Yeah. Right off the bat too. I mean, not including Fano, but I mean, just from a high level view, casual fan. I mean, the fact that they got both Concepcion and Denzel Boston
Yeah.
and Emmanuel McNeil Warren, I was
Who
like,
let them do this?
what's going
Yeah.
on
How are
here?
we
Like,
letting him do this? Like, yeah.
what? How are they getting these guys?
Yeah. I think, yeah, with pairing Concepcion and
Crazy.
Boston, it
Yeah,
is
crazy.
really interesting because Boston gives you size, obviously, but I think they both have quite a bit of versatility. Like Boston could be that big slot that, maybe Elijah Surratt, you know, slots in as for the Ravens. And yeah, I mean, this is kind of, what you'd want to prepare for being a contender. I mean, I don't know. In terms of the old line, I know you focused a little bit on that. What was your take on Fano there with their topic? Obviously they traded back and got some value there. So it's hard to really fault them. Even this value versus big board is not considering the fact that they scooped up some capital to trade back. But yeah, sorry, Dale. What were your thoughts on?
No, I mean, in our pre-draft episode, our wish list, I did, although it would have been the later pick, which you look back on it now, and that was obviously like he wasn't going to make it down to 24, but Fano was one of the 2 players that I had on my wish list for the Browns, and I mean, he's versatile lineman. He can play, all 5 spots. And so he can just go where they need him to go, a need rating of a 9. So it was just something that they needed to address 100%, at least in the first round. They needed to get an O lineman with one of those 2 picks.
Yeah. So yeah, Fano scares me. I mean, I think underrated, like versus top competition. He did kind of his overall numbers look good, but against like top competition, it's kind of shaky, especially in the true pass sets. And having both length and anchor concerns, that's a scary pairing, right? Because you're not going to be able to keep yourself clean, and you're not going to be able to drop an anchor and really, hold your ground. at least at his current weight. I mean, he's obviously starting from such a high athletic standpoint that he could probably add some weight and still be good. But you know, with some good
Yeah.
coaching, he has for better or worse, they have the old Ravens O-line coach. So we'll see how Warhop does with Fano. Uh, but yeah, if you need help at O-line, yeah, getting a 5 position flexible guy is what you'd want. But I do think that if you take him, you have to be okay with him potentially being a center only. And, that's now like a $25 million a year or 28 million, I think, yeah, position. So I guess that's fine, right? But with Linderbaum, but yeah. So, yeah. So, I mean, Austin Barber, strange pick to me in the third, just given how much, other options there were there. Tucker Brailsford is a guy that I was really thinking about for the Ravens, and I ended up thinking that I don't want him. He's very similar to Linderbaum, where he is like right at the bottom limit of what can work for a center in terms of your frame at the NFL level. And I don't think I'd want the Ravens to sign up for another, however many years of a guy who might get really pushed around in pass protection. And for the Steelers too, like I thought, I thought he was going to be like Kendrick Green size. Kendrick Green was, I think, 300 pounds. Right? I mean, he's one of the prototypical like this guy doesn't have enough sand in his pants to play on the O line and even at center. But he's bigger than Brailsford, so that's a little scary to me that he just might not even be able to put on enough weight to survive at the NFL level. But obviously, he was a great college player. So, and that's the athleticism. Yeah. But so, yeah, couple of guys that are really skirting that bottom end of viability size wise, but uber athletes. So maybe they're just like, we're going to just zone a bunch of stuff and try to burst some big plays in the run game.
And the Browns couldn't help
Sure.
themselves in drafting Taylor Green at the very end. I mean, obviously that was a lot of value that you can see here, and it was their number one need. It's the Browns, so it's just funny that they just added a quarterback to
Yeah.
the mix. In
Yeah. If he's got the right mentality, though, like, I mean, he could add to the tight end room. So, like, if you think about it, you could see like their final 3 picks all being like sort of like galaxy brain, really good value tight ends, right? Like I like all 3 of those guys, honestly. I mean, I didn't love Joe Royer, but I think he was obviously a decent value. I love Carson Ryan. I think he was on a lot of people's like sleeper lists. I did think he's great value there, and he has the athleticism, and it's a bunch of different sort of like stabs at tight end. And I think one thing that pissed me off with the Ravens last year is it was just like an amazing D tackle draft, and we take like one incredibly undersized D tackle on late on day 3, and that's it. Whereas I think when you have a really, really like historically deep draft, it's good to just grab, at least on day 3, 1 or 2 of those guys, because you're getting value there that you wouldn't in any other draft. Like those guys would just go way higher in another draft. So yeah. So yeah, just taking some flyers on those guys late, I think made a lot of sense. Yeah. So yeah, on the plot here, we can see really not a ton of reaches. And the ones that are, again, it's a pattern, right? The reaches are going to be at a position of need. And I had to put the scale out to plus and minus 150 to fit how much value they got on Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. I mean, obviously, just, an amazing value there. Yeah. So solid draft. I think with sort of the analytics guys coming under a lot of fire, Kwesi of the Vikings being fired, and frankly making a lot of picks that didn't look very analytically sound to me over the years. Here's an example of like an analytics guy sort of earning his keep here, I think, and putting together a good draft for the Browns. Yeah. So I just kind of put together a couple of slides here, just the top values versus the consensus board for throughout the division, right? So obviously the top 2 are the Browns, but the rest of the other ones, the values are kind of mixed here, right? Between the other teams here. Dunker, obviously the big one for the Steelers. So just to kind of put in perspective that how much value teams got. I mean, Neil Warren is the obvious outlier in Boston, but some nice values versus the board here. And to just also look here at the all of the biggest reaches. Again, Hanachor, we've talked through him. Takari Davis, I think that was kind of a bad pick, just because I think there was there are other big corners like Ephesians, Prysock, other guys later that same archetype basically of like really big physical corners that were way cheaper. Adler, again, he's a QB, so you got to take the consensus big board with some grain of salt, right? If you hit, it's like the value will blow anything else out of the water, right? But yeah, every team here is represented, obviously, in the reaches. So it's kind of you can just look on the color, the texture here that everyone did their fair share of reaches. And yeah, so I kind of just netted out. So again, earlier we kind of sorted by how much draft capital did they have, and this year is sorted by just what was their sort of percentage performance versus consensus. So not looking at, again, you can see now how many net points they got, but how many versus what they came in with, right? So the Bengals do slightly lead the Browns, who are obviously on both sides of the spectrum of least versus most draft capital. And yeah, Ravens, took some modest values. Steelers with some reaches, but again, we've kind of covered that. I'm really stunned at how well the Browns did, to be honest. Like I feel like what we see a lot is that like teams, when they have a lot of draft capital, especially with multiple first round picks, it almost like burns a hole in their wallet, and they feel like they can just reach all over or trade up or do a bunch of sort of like vanity or not sound things, right? Whereas they did the opposite, right? They traded back, knowing that maybe they could trade back up if they needed to, but otherwise, let's trade back and get some value versus like, hey, we got 2 first round picks. Let's do like with the Jaguars and maybe just throw a bunch of capital to the wind and try to move up. They didn't do that. They earned value from trading back and picked overall some pretty good value. So I'm sure most people are probably saying this, but yeah, I was really impressed by the Browns and they gave Todd Monken a lot to work with. Like if where we were sitting a few months ago, I mean, this is a totally different team with the free agency in the draft. So
Yep, absolutely. Offense is like completely revamped from both free agency and the draft. It's funny because like they brought in a very capable coach. They've completely retooled, boosted the offensive side of the ball. I mean, of course, having better players, you're naturally going to perform better. But I wonder, just I don't know if I'm making sense here, but like just the Browns had a good draft, but I wonder how well will they put all of that to good use, given
right, yeah. I mean,
historically how the Browns
I
just
always
are.
think of that one killer offseason they had, I think with Baker, and then who was there? Joe Thomas was retiring, and the Browns fans were losing their mind. They're like, "Oh my God, we're Super Bowl contenders this year. You can't retire on us now. Like it's all changing. You're gonna miss out right when we're gonna win the Super Bowl." And he was doing like the Tobey Maguire, just like bye, bye, like excuse me. Not. He's heard all that before, and then of course they were terrible, right? He's seen it. He's seen enough to know, like, no, we're not contenders. We're not doing anything, And yeah, it's very much possible that this could amount to nothing, right? The Browns are just gonna Brown, but yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, but the other thing I wanted to that I really, again, the Bengals. Okay, why do they have the least draft capital? Obviously, the Dexter Lawrence trade, right? And okay, where was the first round pick for every other team in the
Yeah,
division? O line, right off the bat, every single other team. And every team took an interior guy high. I mean, Dunker, you know,
yeah,
in the consensus board was like pretty much second round pick, but they got him in the third. And then obviously Ravens, Browns, potentially taking very high, like top 15 an
Yeah.
interior guy. If you see Fano on the interior, which I do. So like, I don't want to give him too much credit, but like, it's clear that everyone else is trying to tool up and get some firepower on the interior to try to counter Dexter Lawrence and some of the other big D tackles. Obviously, the Steelers have some too, but yeah. So yeah, just to recap real quick, Bengals coming in with just 256,
All right.
Rich Hill points of draft capital. They were plus 19 versus consensus. Browns with the most 959 points of draft capital. They were plus 18% in value over consensus, over and above those 959. So they got a lot of value, added a ton of talent. Ravens at 583 points of draft capital. They got a 14% sort of like value versus the board. And Steelers, very similar to the Ravens, 573 points of draft capital, minus 24, the only negative team versus the big board overall for their whole draft class. But, hit like every other team hit their needs. So, yeah, sorry. just to wrap it up there.
Well, and that's it for today's episode of the Steel Flop. What were some of your reactions to the draft? Happy, sad, meh? We'd love to hear from you, so please leave a comment. And if you're a fan of the AFC North, please click that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. He's Matt, I'm Ryan, and we'll see you in the next one.